share if I may?
Please do. I shouldn't have been taking a drink of my Dr. Pepper right at that second. Thank you, Sarah.
Of course, and anything necessary to make sure everyone has the energy and caffeine needed to make it through a second day of board meetings. So thank you for your time and energy. Thank you, board members. Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. I'm just going to provide a quick overview of the specific funding streams that we are bringing forward for your consideration and direction on here today in this study session. As far as the overall COVID-19 relief funding, we regularly talk about that we've received multiple awards at different times. For today's context, we're going to be looking at two specific funding stream items. The first is going to be ESSER 2, which was awarded on January 6th of 2021 in terms of the state reserve, which we'll get into a little more details here momentarily. The second item you'll be considering is actually two separate subcomponents of the ARP-ESSER or ESSER 3 from the American Rescue Plan Act that was received in March of 2021 as well. Just as a friendly reminder for those who don't see our regular updates, the majority of the COVID-19 relief funding for K-12 education does go directly to our LEAs. So this allows for each of our LEAs to be able to create solutions that are specific to their community needs in response to the impacts they may have experienced due to the pandemic. When we are talking about state funds, we're really looking at a very small, less than 10% portion of the total aggregate funding received for K-12 education in response to COVID. And because it is a smaller portion, that's really where we turn to the board for guidance in terms of how these funds are used to address systemic state issues that really go above and beyond meeting the local needs, which are being addressed by the majority of the allocations that are being received. So as far as ESSER 2 goes, as a friendly reminder, any project that is going to be funded by ESSER 2 state reserve dollars will need to have expenditures concluding by September 30th of 2023. So that is going to be the shorter time frame and the more urgent funding stream in terms of being able to select specific areas for obligation, getting those running, as well as then concluded and fully expended by September 30th, 2023. In terms of the ESSER 2 key points, as a friendly reminder, we did see our LEAs spend the majority of their available funds on addressing accelerated learning for students, purchasing educational technology, as well as supporting summer learning and supplemental after-school activities. In terms of an overview of all of our state project logistics that we're sharing with you as a reminder here today, these have been funded out of the existing 10%. All projects must be in response to COVID-19. That's a rationale we need to have at the State Board of Education in terms of both monitoring, auditing, as well as for ARP submission to the U.S. Department of Education. All funds for these projects, as well as the subsequent ones, we as staff have had brought to the board to be approved in open and public board meetings. And then just a reminder that the state projects are in the same time frame as our LEA awards and have to conclude when the funding streams expire. And they are one-time and time limited, not ongoing sources. As far as the Sr1 state projects, this is just for historical reference in terms of where the state chose to allocate the state reserve in the original CARES allotment received in May of 2020. All of the Sr1 funds have been obligated, and that money went specifically to establishing the state base for LEAs that were not going to receive a federal title award. We also, as a state, you as a board authorized $3.9 million that would go to K-12 PPE needs. This is where the state stepped in due to some of the supply chain issues and was able to procure hand sanitizer stands, hand sanitizer, and disinfectant wipes at the start of the 2020 school year. Those funds were then directed by the legislature in the special session of August 2020 to be swapped with state CRF funds. And then the legislature directed the State Board of Education to use that swapped funding now coming from ESSER specific to supporting the expansion of students in online charter schools for that 2020-21 school year. In addition to that, the board authorized some funding specific to the early intervention software license increase, an existing state program that saw a significant increase in school-based requests related to access to the software for students. Those increases were funded one time with ESSER 1 funds. The Scribble tool for the 2020-21 school year, that was a single year of funding that came out of ESSER 1. The evaluation of the K-12 broadband grant, which was separately funded through state coronavirus relief funds. And then last but not least, the Targeted Support and Improvement Summer Planning Project. This again is specific to work being led by Director Tracy Vandeventer in terms of giving LEAs resources to support teachers spending additional time in terms of reviewing individual student needs and being able to create responsive plans related to those needs. As far as ESSER 2 goes, the current state of ESSER 2 is up on the screen for your consideration. You'll see that the state board has authorized, again, the state base specific to the LEAs that were not going to receive an award through the federal distribution. The state board has also funded the K-3 Professional Learning for Literacy project in terms of addressing some of the needs that were noted in the spring in terms of challenges with student literacy based on previous years comparative to post-pandemic. The demonstrated competency assessment revision, this is specific to updating those demonstrated competency assessments, which we see more LEAs participating in. Transforming accountability to support personalized competency-based learning is a smaller project that's being led by Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen. You also approved early learning coaches for rural Utah in terms of placing those individuals at the RESAs. And then finally, the Scribble contract statewide extension for K-12 teachers of 2021 through 2023. That does leave the remaining ESSER 2 state reserve as presented on the screen, which is one of the three components of funding that we're seeking direction on as the outcome of this study session. As far as the third round goes, just as a friendly reminder, when we're talking about the American Rescue Plan or ARP funds, these funds do need to be spent by September 30th, 2024. So they have a little bit more time than our ESSER 2 funds in terms of one additional year that we're able to complete expenditures and projects and still be within the federal allowable timeframe. As far as the fund goes, again, the 90% award has gone to LEAs. We will be specifically looking at not just flexible reserve, which is what the state has in ESSER 2, but also a very specific federal requirement, which is that the state spends 5% of the total award, over $30.7 million that needs to be used to address accelerated learning that is necessitated due to disruptions due to the pandemic. So this is going to require that USBE not only selects projects that meet that requirement for addressing student learning needs due to that disruptions due to the pandemic, but it's also required that these are evidence-based as defined in the federal expectations and guidance. And last but not least, that those projects will need to be submitted to the U.S. Department of Education for their approval and authorization before staff are able to get started on those. It was called out in our ARP state ESSER plan acceptance that this was an expected process the state would go through. So once we get that direction from you as staff, we would submit an amendment to the existing ARP state plan, being able to reflect what our intentions are for those funds so that they can be approved by the U.S. Department of Education. As far as we presented these slides yesterday, so I'm just going to jump through really quickly. We do have some backup materials, again, related to where the LEAs have chosen to submit for their plans so that you do have that for reference in terms of where we're seeing the majority of local funding going to inform your decisions about statewide. And then finally, just as kind of a visual of where we are with the ARP-ESSER award, again, the base has been established out of the flexible state reserve. We do have the components related to maintaining the personnel who work for and support this project, as well as some of the additional costs related to dashboards, some of the monitoring and reporting requirements that we're engaged in. You will also see the 2 awards have been called out specific to the evidence-based summer enrichment program, as well as the evidence-based comprehensive after-school grants. Those were again required by the federal guidance, and the board has made that commitment in terms of those existing awards to the field in the October board meeting. That leaves us with the 2 remaining components, the 30.7+ million that needs to be directed at evidence-based strategies to address accelerated learning needs due to COVID-19, as well as the flexible ARP state reserve. Flexible meaning it still has to be in response to COVID-19, and it does need to fall within the federal guidance of what is an allowable use case, but it doesn't necessarily have that additional layered language of needing to address accelerated learning explicitly or those evidence-based strategies. So that completes my overview of the available funding stream. We've presented in backup some of these documents, not just the slide deck, but also a copy of the full log related to the existing obligations that the State Board of Education has made for each of the individual ESSER funds. And I'm happy, Chair, if there are any questions for context to answer those at this time.
Thank you. Great timing, Director Young. These guys are so good. We have 10 minutes for questions. And who is driving right now?
Hey, sorry to keep bugging you. This is Mark. I'm still not finding a truck. I'm clear up into Heber. I'm into just about everyone.
Mark, Chair Huntsman. Chair Huntsman.
But
Chair Huntsman, you're on. You are not muted.
oh, good.
Cindy, if you have whoever's controlling the meeting,
I'll keep you.
I don't think I have control of the meeting.
Somebody did it.
Who's driving right now? Does someone have?
I am, Chair.
Oh, you muted him. Thank you. Do you know it would be easier to take questions if we are not in a share screen mode? It will just be quicker. Thank you, Board Member Booth.
I had a question on the as to how were the funds distributed to teachers. It was the last item under ESSER 2, the money that was going to teachers to help them catch up in the summer times. It was, seems to me, maybe 600,000 or so. How was that distributed, and how would it be distributed if we were to continue that if the need is still there?
Go ahead.
If I may. Thank you. So in terms of that, Board Member Booth, we did distribute individual grants to LEAs through our Utah Grants Management System. All of the federal funds, including the projects we'll consider today, will need to be administered through a reimbursement process. So we established the subaward to the individual LEA who says this is how many teachers that we perceive participating in this additional opportunity. And then once that work's completed, they seek reimbursement at the LEA level from the State Board of Education for those payments made to individual teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands right now.
Not tracking.
So let's move forward to the next piece of our discussion, which is academic headwinds and tailwinds.
Great, that is Darren Nielsen, if he can. Perfect.
Good afternoon, members of the Board of Education. My name is Darren Nielsen. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning, and I'm happy to have a few minutes on your agenda today to review some of our 2021 student achievement results. Last spring, you may remember, we were directed by the board, staff was to conduct a comprehensive set of studies to help us better understand the effects of the pandemic. I need to, while I'll be speaking to this, I need to acknowledge that the work done on this was done by members of the data and statistics team at the Utah State Board of Education, as well as data analysts in teaching and learning and CTE. In addition, We enlisted the help of 2 individuals and some additional interns for the Center for Assessment. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Leslie King, a senior associate who's not able to be with us today for the Center for Assessment for doing a bulk of this work. And then Dr. Scott Marion, the executive director for the Center for Assessment, who is also heavily involved in this work and is taking his time to join us today and will be available for questions. The primary question that we asked ourselves as we began this work last spring is, to what extent have pandemic-related disruptions influenced student achievement in Utah? We looked at the following data sets to try to answer that question. And in addition, you may remember as a board, you authorized staff in December of 2020 to include some opportunity to learn questions, a small number of questions that we incorporated into the Spring 2021 RISE and Utah Aspire Plus assessment. That information has been very helpful and will continue to provide value from a research perspective in helping us understand the impacts of the pandemic at the individual student level. In any case that we could, we disaggregated this information by these following variables. And you'll see that in the executive report that you see. And then in addition, I do want to acknowledge it's called out in the executive report, but there'll be a full report that will be released in the coming days that will include much more detail for those who are interested in getting deeper into this information. So some key findings from our work, and some people might say, well, this was expected. We knew that there would be fewer students tested in 2021 compared to 2019, but this study did a great job of documenting that. We'll go into a little more detail into the effects of that and the impacts of that, especially in trying to use information in a comparative way to prior year performance. This screen demonstrates the difference or the reduction in student achievement, or not student achievement, but in student participation rates between 2019 and 2021. You'll notice that they are as low as 2%, particularly with our KEEP and our Acadians, and as high as a 16% reduction in participation with our WIDA access for EL's assessment that we offer. You'll also notice that there's a general trend that the younger the students are, the higher rate of participation, and it decreases as it goes up through the 10th grade and into the 11th grade where the ACT was administered. The next 2 slides that I have are just designed to help our audience understand the significance of having a reduced percentage of students participating in the assessments and the effect that that can have on doing comparisons to prior years. In this example, School A's performance from year 1 to year 2 went from 65% to 80%. If we were to stop looking at the information at that level, we would easily draw incomplete conclusions and inferences about what the meaning of that is. If we look a little closer, we see that the number of students tested between year 1 and year 2 went from 120 to 50. Perhaps the more important thing is to determine whether the reduction in student participation represents the population in an equal way. So on this slide, we see that same example school, a School A, year 1 to year 2, we can see that there's a disproportionate effect on participation from these particular 3 student groups, which are often associated with lower performance. This information is important for us as we try to make meaning of the student achievement data that we were looking at on the previous slide. So participation matters, and it matters as much this year as any year that I've been employed in education over the last 26 years. So student performance, in a typical year, we would just simply publish student achievement participation rates on the school report card and on the data gateway. And there would probably be a very little or maybe no discussion about it in a board meeting. But because participation matters, we don't feel that it's professionally responsible to handle the release of the 2021 assessment data in that manner. We see here that while it was expected, it came to pass that student performance was notably lower in the 2021 year compared to 2019. And that's true across all grade levels, all subject areas and student groups, with declines slightly larger in mathematics in comparison to ELA. This is a picture that I took at a region cross-country meet several years ago where my daughter was competing. For those of you on this in this meeting who have the experience of running or enjoy running, you recognize that when there's a headwind blowing towards you, it does a couple of things, at least a couple of things to you as a runner. It requires you to exert much more energy to be able to maintain your pace. And then as the headwinds pick up and the force of that picks up, it becomes impossible for you, even with increased exertion, to maintain the same pace that you could do without those headwinds. This screen is designed to illustrate some of the psychometric strategies that we undertook through this study to try to bring meaning to the achievement results, and also to determine what the effects of the pandemic was. This figure visually illustrates, using results from RISE Grade 7 Mathematics, the relationship between the 2021 observed and the 2019 fair trend or adjusted average scale scores. To help with interpretation, we contextualize the pandemic effect in terms of what is expected for a student to advance from one performance level to the next, or performance level change. As suggested by the Utah TAC, the expected performance level change is quantified as the difference between the approaching proficient and proficient cut scores on each RISE for the RISE or Utah Aspire Plus assessments. So what we're looking at here, the blue box contains the mean scale score that we observed in the 2021 assessment for statewide for RISE Grade 7 Mathematics. The green box then illustrates the average scale score for similar students in the spring of 2019, or our attempt to show what would we have expected that mean score to be had the pandemic not occurred. The following two slides illustrate that same type of information for all content areas for language arts, math, and science in RISE, and also for Utah Aspire Plus. I do want to pause for a moment and note that you'll recognize that we don't include third grade ELA in math or fourth grade ELA in math. And if you remember, the effort to create this fair trend score, or this prediction of what our scores would have been had the pandemic not occurred, we're unable to do that without prior years of assessment. And so we didn't include third or fourth grade on this slide. The other thing you'll observe is that typically, again, generally, language arts wasn't affected as dramatically as mathematics. It's also true for our secondary level. So the other part from our original or the initial part of this conversation is, what was the effect of these missing students, or the students who did not participate in 2021? The key finding here was that the missing students were generally from lower performing in 2019 compared to those who participated in both years. So we took additional steps to try to determine what would the scores have been had the students who were missing been included in the assessment system during 2021. You'll recognize this slide from the previous, from 2 slides ago, with the addition of the orange box. This figure extends the previous one by including an estimate of what the average scale score for RISE Grade 7 Mathematics in 2021 would have been if the missing students had been tested. The difference between the 2019 adjusted score, the green box, and the 2021 with the missing student score, the orange box, represents an estimation of the pandemic effect with missing students included. To help contextualize the effect, we also present the pandemic effects in terms of expected performance level change. The missing students adjusted score is a best guess and best case scenario. The key point that the missing student adjustment illustrates is that the pandemic effects estimated in our studies are likely an underestimate of the true pandemic effects. It is based only on students who participated in 2019 and 2020, and does not include a group of lower performing students from whom we do not know how the pandemic affected. The following 2 slides, again, illustrate that same information for all of our content areas in RISE and also Utah Aspire Plus. Some people might say, so then what? These next few slides talk about calls to action that we believe are clear and present from the studies that we've completed. Despite the heroic efforts by teachers, and leaders during the past 2 school years, the results reveal unprecedented impacts on both student participation and academic achievement on Utah assessments. The results are noticeably lower for students from certain racial and ethnic groups, as well as English learners and students with disabilities. These findings, however, need to be interpreted along with other information from local assessments and opportunity to learn indicators to best determine the actions necessary to address learning disruptions. State assessment results in 2022 will be an important source of confirmatory information. In the near term, educators and school leaders must rely on assessment information closest to the teaching and learning process to guide acceleration efforts. We did identify LEAs in schools that appeared to buck the trends and overcame the influence of the pandemic disruptions. That information will be included in the full report. And in fact, this is the part of the full report we're just trying to finalize and have additional meetings scheduled for later today, even on that topic. If we go back to the analogy of the runners, this picture comes from an event that Cache County Elementary Schools did called the Wellsville Mile, where my daughter was competing many years ago. These resources that you'll be discussing shortly can act as an academic tailwind, eliminating the strain caused by the pandemic and accelerating our students' academic progress over the coming years. The following slides, I'll go through fairly quickly, are part of our opportunity to learn information. This slide represents the 4 learning models that LEAs could select when they completed a survey last spring. We were able to correspond the survey results from each LEA with the students who were enrolled in those LEAs and connect that to student achievement outcomes. This screen represents that information in an aggregate format. I want to call the board's attention and the public's attention to a couple of things here. First of all, it's very important to pay attention to the N size, or in this case, the number of students that participated or number of students included in the achievement results. So if we look under Utah Aspire Plus, number of students, we see that for the remote, the N size was 3,833, and the online school, 1,651. The big difference in N size for this number should cause us to make a cautious approach about drawing inferences or conclusions about the differences in percent proficient. This slide represents the questions that were included in the RISE and Utah Aspire Plus Opportunity to Learn survey. Again, an opportunity for each of our students to respond for the first time ever, where the State Board of Education asked for their opinion to tell us about their personal experience in learning during the 2021 school year. The following slides are just representations of other data sets that we didn't have the ability to do the additional analysis that we described earlier. Remember, the kindergarten entry-exit profile participation rate declined by only 2%, which gives us more confidence in our ability to draw conclusions or comparisons to prior years' experiences. You'll note here that in 2021, for numeracy, the difference or the decline in performance is almost non-existent. In fact, is higher than the 2018 end-of-year numeracy scores for KEEP. We do see a decline of 5% for literacy in our kindergarten between the 19 and 21 school year. Some summary comments are listed here. And just a reminder, and this is common across the full presentation in the executive summary and also in the full report that will come out, we see that students from low-income families, students learning English, and students of color experience larger declines in many cases. This slide represents the Acadians Reading Benchmark achievement proficiencies over the last 4 years. This is a unique assessment in that we offer this or administer this assessment 3 times during the academic year. If we look at the middle column, middle of the year benchmark percentage, I'll call it pink, but I'm sure there is a more official color to this. But the pink column representing the 2021 school year, that assessment was administered only weeks before the pandemic influenced a soft closure of all of our schools in March of 2020. So the blue line, the middle of year assessment in 2021 occurred almost one year after the pandemic brought in the resulting disruptions to our educational setting. We see a 7% decline there. Again, please note the Acadians reading, while we did just see a decline in participation, was only a 2% decline, so it gives us more confidence in being able to make year-over-year comparisons using this data set. This slide contains a summary of those points, and again, you'll see throughout here the very last bullet: among racial, ethnic, student groups, students who identify as Native American, Alaska Native, those who identify as Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and those who identify as Black African American showed the largest percentage point decrease from 2019 to 2021, consistently across all grades. It's also noteworthy that the first grade students also experienced generally the largest decrease. This slide depicts the performance of our 11th grade ACT administration between 2017 and 2021. We didn't include the 2020 data here because we were only able to complete the statewide administration for about half of our students before the pandemic shut down the schools. Many students were able to complete the ACT in the spring, summer, or fall of 2020 through the use of vouchers, but with the changes in the administration delivery system of that assessment, we did not include that data in this set. You'll see again a slight decline on the state averages in our 11th grade ACT administration for those who meet the 18 composite, or with the average composite score. Again, the middle bullet here, score declines were observed for all racial ethnic groups, in this case, except Native American. And if we were to look closer at this, I would caution that the N size, or the number of students that participated from that student group, was significantly reduced. And so to be cautious about making inferences or conclusions about that. Larger score declines were observed for schools with suburban locales relative to those with rural town and city locales. The last data that I want to review is credit earned versus credit attempted. In looking at credit earned versus credit attempted for grades 9 through 12 since 2018, we see that consistently approximately 90% of the credits across our state are completed, with 10% not being completed in a given year. We do see a 5% increase in the percent of credits not being completed in 2021. Due to inconsistency in how this data is recorded at the LEA level, some caution should be taken when considering this information, remembering that we don't typically collect and use credit earned versus credit attempted data to make decisions at the statewide level. It appears that urban LEAs and those serving students with higher numbers of students from low-income families realized a lower percentage of credit earned. Schools that reported a school schedule type of regular in-person or hybrid instruction realized the highest percentage of credit earned, with 86% and 90% respectively. That concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'll be available now for questions, or if questions come up later as you deliberate and discuss options for using the funding that's available to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen. I am looking for hands for people who have questions. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Let's see, where's my numbers? Yeah, I'd like to see the end size on some of these groups that we're, I mean, we're making the statement, but I didn't see a chart and I didn't see the end size. Some of those individual groups represent only about 1% of our population. So I just curious on the end size, just for the same reason why, I mean, you made the statement earlier that, you know, 3,000 versus 100,000, right? You're going to have a fluctuation. So I'd be curious on that, and also the standard deviation. And then the standard deviation on, what is the standard deviation on our, oh, I should have wrote down the page number, our initial proficiency rate. Did we have an approximate on that?
So let me ask a clarifying question if I can. Excuse me, Vice Chair. Should I respond?
Please.
Okay. I'm gonna put my screen back up. It might make it easier, Board Member Earl, to get to the same spot for your question. I believe this was the first screen that we talked about where we have the actual score, the observed score, in the blue column, and then our fair trend estimate in the green column. And if I understand correctly, your question is, do we have a standard deviation score for the blue score, average scale score observed, the differences compared to the prior year assessment observed?
I'm not seeing, and maybe someone needs to share because I can't see the screen.
Oh, I apologize.
Sorry.
Thank you for the one button too few.
Thank you.
So the blue column, the average scale score observed, is your question related to that score and the variation between that score and the observed score?
Yeah. Well, it would be relevant. So yes. Do we know about what the standard deviation is here? And if you don't, you could send it on to me. If you have it right offhand, if not, I'm just curious on that.
Okay. No, Dr.
And then I have,
oh, go ahead. I was going to ask Dr. Marion if he's available and has comments to add to that question about the standard deviation. I don't have that in front of me right now.
Looking.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Board Member Earl. I'm looking in the full report. I will post it in the chat. We actually did calculate effect sizes, which, as you know, right, is the difference between means divided by the base year standard deviation. So I could back it out that way, but we have it in here though. I'll take it out for you.
The last question is the missing students. How do we clarify that or classify them as missing students? In other words, do we take their data from 2 years before and then compare it to, we know who the students are, right? And do we take their data from 2 years previous and make it an average, or how did we decide that the prediction of their score? Is it from several years prior that we took the same student and then I'm just trying to understand how we got that prediction.
Dr. Marion, would you like to take that question?
Sure. Great questions, Board Member Earl, and Leslie King is also on now as well. The way that we do that is the first step in this, what we call the fair trend piece, is to look for students in 2017 that looked like students in 2019 in terms of their prior scores, and we match those up, and then we also look at the 2021 students, and we know that the 2019 pool is bigger than the 2021 pool because of enrollment and participation. And so we have a sense by just doing that comparison of who's not in the pool, in that 2019 pool that we're using. So then we go back to 2017 and we're able to see if we could say, all right, for these kids who are not missing, what was their growth, if you will, their change in scores from 2017 to 2019. It's a little crude because you're doing it on various demographic characteristics and prior scores. So there's always the fear of unmeasured variables, but what we have seen, and we've done this now, I just actually have a blog coming out about this next week because I'm doing this in so many states, that in all these states, more than a dozen, what we're characterizing as the effect right now is clearly an underestimate, because the kids who tended to either not test because of they weren't enrolled or they didn't participate tended to be lower performing kids, as you saw from that line graph that Darren showed.
Okay.
And Leslie, if you want to add,
Yeah.
Sorry.
So let me ask then, so if I'm understanding, you took their approximate growth, averaged it for those prior years of the missing students, and then you would calculate what it would have been, but then also the reduction based on the average of other students. Is that accurate?
Leslie, go ahead. You should answer.
Yeah, Board Member Earl, yeah, that's exactly correct. So
Okay.
as Scott said, we already know these are probably, we found out from, I assume what Darren shared, that these are lower performing. But so there's you're pointing out two really important assumptions that we assumed when we tried to guesstimate. Really, it's really a best guess at what these kids would have done. Is we're assuming that the pandemic affected them the same way that it did the kids that did test both years. We understand that's probably not a very reasonable assumption. In fact, if anything, the pandemic probably affected those kids more. So that's one key assumption. And then we also assume that somehow they've performed similarly than they would have in previous years. And that's another big assumption. So as we say, as we've been trying to make sure we put around disclaimers that this is a best case scenario of how these missing kids would have done. Honestly, the true effect is probably worse than what we're seeing here. So.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood the process to calculate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Vice Chair Davis, I have the answer to Board Member Earl's question about standard deviation if you want, Board Member Earl. So we do this in the scale score metric. Percent proficient is too chunky for this. So on the scale scores, when you're looking at the difference in scale scores, the standard deviation ranges across subgroups from low 70s to low 90s. And so that's a way to contextualize the scale score difference. And for those who don't live in this world every day, if you get a 20% of a standard deviation change, if you got that in the positive direction, you would be throwing a parade in front of the state board building. And so when you think about that in a negative, you have to take that into consideration.
Thank you. Board Member Booth.
I'm just interested in hearing just briefly from Drs. Marion and King and from Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, having lived with all of this data and processed it and put it together in various formats, and from your perspective, looking at other states as well, where do we need to be giving our attention then? What are the big three takeaways as to where we need to be giving our very best attention and resources to correct what this data is showing? What are the top priorities in your minds?
So, Darren, I think you should go first.
Yeah, Vice Chair Davis, should I respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Board Member Booth, it's a great question, one that we've been mulling over for months as we look through this data. I think one of the big takeaways is that the effect of the pandemic has been significant enough that we shouldn't expect it to be corrected in a matter of months. That this is an ongoing effort that's going to need to be put in place. And that's one of the calls to action here, is that it likely will extend beyond the September 2024, when the ESSER funds or ARP funds expire and need to be spent. Number two, we know that students, while all students were affected by the pandemic, and when we get the full report out, we will be able to highlight student groups and LEAs that seem to overcome the pandemic in exceptional ways and were able to maintain their trajectory or their pace, if you will. And so one of the things from a research perspective that we would like to do is to continue to investigate, as Dr. King mentioned, as he worked through this with us, is this is a treasure trove of data that will take significant time to investigate the meaning of many of these things and be able to identify, highlight, and advance successful practices that allowed students, even in the significant conditions that they experienced the pandemic in an educational environment over the last number of years, to succeed and even excel. And then finally, clearly, the students who have traditionally been underserved by our educational system were impacted at least, if not more substantially in every case, than the students who have not traditionally been underserved by our educational system. So some people across the country say, well, this has shown a light on a lot of the inequities and disparities and challenges that education systems have had in dealing with some of these challenging circumstances. The students on an individual basis bring to our schools all the time, and teachers on an individual level have found ways to be successful at meeting these students' needs. The scope and magnitude of the effect of the pandemic, though, just necessitates scaling up those types of interventions and strategies that have been effective at the individual level across the system, so that it can affect a much larger group of students.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Superintendent.
Thank you. Since we have 1 minute and I don't see other hands right now, I'm just going to make a quick note that I was just really happy recently because I saw a press release that our ACT scores were, we were all above the national average. And I'm realizing that I shouldn't have been celebrating that we were above a national average. What I should have understood is that the national average was actually at quite a significant decline. And I don't know what that reason is, if because kids weren't in school or what for that whole year last year in many states, but you know how to burst a bubble for sure. Any other questions here? And I don't mean to be facetious too. I also want to just thank you for this is so much time that you've put into this, and we really appreciate all of you and your expertise. Thank you for coming and sharing today. Let's go ahead and move into our potential uses of funds now. And in fairness, I'm just going to go down the list with our board members in order that was sent in the email from Tiffany. They're not alphabetized, and I don't know if they were listed the first one to enter down the list, but just know there's no preference on my part. I'm just going with the list that we were sent in the email. So let's hear a 3-minute presentation, or actually before we start these quick presentations, do any of you have questions just on the presentations or what's expected from you if you're bringing an idea forward now? Please, Director Young.
So if individual board members, when you start your presentation, just want to let me know if you'd like me to put your proposal on the screen. I won't unless you ask for that, but I have them all ready if that's of interest.
That sounds great. Thank you. Board Member Hutchings, you are first, and I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm going to get my little timer out. And then if we need to go back to anybody's presentation, if we have extra time in the end with questions or you want to give more information, then we will do that. I just want to make sure everybody gets their fair amount until then. So go ahead, Board Member Hutchings.
Thank you very much. And yes, if you would please show the proposal. And I did read through it in time to myself, so mark it, set, go. This is the Digital Teaching and Learning Jumpstart Proposal. Currently, the state of Utah invests close to $20 million in an existing grant program for digital teaching and learning in K-12. The Digital Teaching and Learning Grant has successfully been implemented in a majority of school districts and charters in Utah. There are some charter schools which have been hesitant to apply, in part because of the comprehensive application process, startup requirements, and administrative load that this grant requires to be effective. As this program has provided the foundation for Utah schools to transition to remote and hybrid learning in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and continues to benefit schools and students as they now lean on technology to assist teachers in providing quality accelerated learning, it is important that every LEA that wants to participate is able to. This fiscal request would provide one-time funding to support the LEAs that are not currently involved in the Digital Teaching and Learning State Grant Program with planning grants and the first year of funding to be able to join the program and engage in the broader digital teaching and learning statewide community of resources and best practices. The Dtl Jumpstart Proposal provides many points of success of the DTL program, demonstrating how Utah teachers have been able to effectively use digital tools to augment teaching and learning during the pandemic, which will also enhance the effectiveness of teachers to now accelerate learning as we emerge from the pandemic. This proposal is intended to remove the barriers that have made it untenable for smaller charter schools that would like to benefit from the funding, training, and supports that the DTL program provides, while holding harmless the schools already participating in the program during the next 2 very critical years. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Board members, you have three minutes for questions. Can we stop the screen share on this so we can, for just a second? I don't see any questions currently. I have one quick question for you since nobody else does. So the requirements to do this DTL grant are not the same as the other DTL grants that other LEAs have done. Is that correct? This is a sort of a streamlined opportunity?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. The requirements are the same. They maintain the same requirements. It provides additional funding and support to help schools who have been hesitant to apply because of the heavy load.
That's right. And second question, maybe this is for staff. I thought someone said that we may not have time for grant formatted options. Did I hear that incorrectly, Director Young?
Yes, so it depends on the individual funding stream and whether or not there's already existing infrastructure. So that's really something that we would consider and give feedback on a case-by-case basis. In the case of digital teaching and learning, because it is an existing state program, there is existing infrastructure that we can build into as opposed to the time it would take to create something new.
Great, thank you. Board Member Lear.
I'm wondering, Stacy, if all the money, the 2 million, and I can't see that now, I can't see your proposal now, but would that all go directly to the, how would that money be spent? Would it go directly to the LEAs who don't have these programs so that they can choose someone to help them? Is it more directed?
It's more directed than that. My understanding is USBE, as part of this, will provide a team that will go to assist the school in the creation and the planning part of the grant proposal, and then also give supports throughout the grant, but additional supports during the first planning year. So this is a 2-year program. The first is a planning year in which the schools will each receive $5,000. For planning, which is actually something that's already in state statutes as a possibility for schools. And the idea is they'll be given additional supports. And so when you have smaller schools where you have administrators that are wearing multiple hats, to take the time and to go to all the trainings and all the activities that are required to do the planning that's needed to make this an effective program. It's something that a lot of schools can't have their leaders leave school for that amount of time in order to be able to do. And so teams from USBE will come and help and give this additional support along with the $5,000 planning money for the first year. And then the second year, they'll receive they'll be a DTL school, and they'll receive the per pupil funding allotted to all the other schools. It just augments that funding so that the other schools who are currently in the DTL program won't have less money, since the legislative allocation is the same. The per pupil spending decreases as more schools participate. Does that answer your question?
It's a quick follow-up. I know I'm taking a lot of time, but Chair, I guess the money is so that the USBE would hire more people. I'm trying to figure out, is that right? Because this is something arguably that the USBE would do anyway, but because they couldn't go to LEAs in that number, they need to hire teams of people. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. My understanding is the actual funding that we would hopefully be approving is money that goes directly to the schools for them to implement the program, and USBE is providing the support without this funding.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Thronson, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I can just real short. Our team would be able to support, just like we do the current DTL grantees, with technical assistance so that they can write the grant. We do this often with our school districts, and Todd is on the call if you guys want more conversation on this.
Okay, great, thank you. And so Board Member Hutchings, again, just quickly, what's the total amount you're requesting, and is it coming from the 8 million pot or the 30 million pot?
The total number is $2,635,477, and we'll take it from wherever the board would like to approve.
Director Young, would it fit in either, or is there one in particular it needs to go?
We would recommend it for the ARP 30.7 million due to disrupted learning.
Thank you. If we could be ready to answer those two questions on each of these presentations, that would be helpful, I think, to board members as well. Thank you, Board Member Hutchings, for your presentation. Yeah, and supporting voices and questioners. Let's move to Board Member Hart for Utah Teachers DonorsChoose for use of ESSER2 or ARP-ESSER state set aside.
Yeah, Sarah, will you put that up on the screen? So what I'm proposing is money going directly to teachers. We've done many projects where it's more on a broad scale, more on a macro level. I think we need to look at the micro level as well and go directly to the teachers. What I'm proposing is amount of money that's yet to be determined. It kind of depends on how much we would want to put towards this. There's a couple of different funding levels that we would consider. But what that amount would do would go through the DonorsChoose platform, which is widely used among teachers. Very few schools in the state of Utah haven't had a DonorsChoose. Teachers put up their projects and the materials that would be required for their projects. It could be maker spaces, it could be classroom libraries, it could be any number of, it could be musical instruments, it could be reading, supplementary materials that were needed for math. It could be manipulatives. Really, it can be up to the imagination of the teacher. And they would put those projects up. We would be putting through DonorsChoose a certain amount of money towards those projects. And those projects are out into out on public social media, public platforms. So various philanthropic organizations could also donate. That's already happening. Chevron, Horace Mann. There's a couple large companies that utilize this platform to provide resources to schools. The DonorsChoose platform or organization, they are a 501c3. They have done this large scale. They're called rapid response programs. They've done it in Nevada, Delaware, and Hawaii. The Nevada program is using ESSER funds. The other two were using other sources of funding. And they vet the submitted projects. They provide reporting to us. They fulfill the funded program. So once a program or once a teacher's project is funded, they fulfill the orders, send the materials to the school. The school then knows, the teacher knows who's funded that project, and they always do thank you notes and that kind of thing. And they put the materials to good use. It's a very efficient way of providing resources to classrooms. They also screen the programs to make sure that they meet the criteria for COVID learning loss. And I think that's probably a quick scenario.
That's great. That was right on 3 minutes. Thank you. Let's have 3 minutes for board members to ask questions about this proposal. Superintendent Dixon. Welcome back.
Thank you. I feel like I should defer to Board Member Booth. I think we raised our hands at the same time. So go ahead, Board Member Booth, if that's all right, Vice Chair Davis, and then I'll ask my question.
That's fine. Board Member Booth.
I'm just interested in more detail on the levels of funding. You said there were a couple of levels that we could pursue.
Sure. So like Nevada did $800 per teacher. It really depends on how much we would, I did not run those calculations. I would be making the ask of if this were to move forward, I would be asking USBE staff to come back with a couple of different tiers. So say we wanted to put 10 million towards it, what would that result in a teacher award being? Or if we wanted to put more towards it. So I don't have those numbers, but they're variable. It depends on what we want to do. I don't know, Ms. Young, if you want to, Sarah, if you want to add anything to that, I don't know.
Vice Chair, if I may.
Yes, and while you add, will you let us know if it's eligible for one or both of those pots of money?
Yes. So to answer that question first, we would recommend this for the flexible state reserve, either in ESSER 2 and or ARP. The other component we would share is that the State Board of Education would ultimately have the prerogative in the December meeting to select how much they would want to make available for an individual teacher project, and then therefore how much money is being put towards it. How many teacher projects we would, be able to fund. And so as a part of that effort, I would say that the DonorsChoose recommendation is that value is around $1,000 per teacher. They have found that is kind of at a value that, especially for our middle school and high school teachers, they can procure then enough classroom supplies specific to meeting all the students they serve. But again, that's a recommendation, and we would look to the board to give direction on what makes sense.
Thank you. Board Member Earl.
Yes, I reached out to a number. I was looking at some resources for special education specifically and what the needs were there. Many of our districts have already kind of filled those intensive needs, but this is one area that they said they felt strongly resources for actual teachers in the classroom for the things that they are in need of. And so I would just strongly, well, not that we're speaking for or against, but this is, I guess what I'm saying is I kind of said, okay, well then we'll just piggyback off of Molly's instead of trying to create two kind of scenarios going on. So just a little bit of information there, especially with special needs or special education educators. This is an area that there was an interest when I reached out to some leadership there.
Thank you. Superintendent Dixon, let's go back to you for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Board Member Hart, if you don't have this information, I can follow through on it next week with Nevada SEA. I'm wondering, they've had a statewide foundation that they do a lot of this work through. I know Clark County has a big warehouse and a foundation as well. Is this coming right through their SEA, or do you know, is it through the state foundation that they run all this? So I'm just trying to think logistically in this collaborative partnership with DonorsChoose, how that was set up. And again, if you don't know that, I can follow through next week.
I believe, and please correct me again, it's a sub-grant through DonorsChoose and their rapid response program.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so the money is sent directly to DonorsChoose and it doesn't go through a foundation to DonorsChoose. It's just sent directly from the state fund, set aside fund.
And the benefit of all of this means that we're utilizing their fulfillment stream, and it significantly reduces the administrative burden on the local districts, the teachers, and while still being very transparent. DonorsChoose has the highest rating for accountability and transparency for 501c.
Thank you. Let's move now to Board Member Norton and hear a 3-minute presentation on USIMS proposal for use of ESSER 2 or ARP-ESSER state set aside. You are muted, Board Member Norton.
There we go. Okay, the Utah Schools Information Management System, USIMS, is a current project to update the foundational data systems for our K-12 education in Utah. This project is focused on redesigning the current system that uses dated code that isn't readily compatible with current technology. This has become a barrier to the agency to be able to respond to community needs, such as adding new data fields, producing real-time visualizations, and integrating with local LEA systems. The current project will allow the agency to become more efficient with time and resources. The $17.2 million for USIMS would supplement state funding already received and allow utilization of both the funding and the state funding to advance and complete this essential project for Utah K-12 education. USIMS is not going to become less expensive as time rolls on. We have experienced delays when key technicians left the project for more lucrative employment. The time is now to accelerate the completion of the USIMS project. Additionally, USIMS will touch every area of public education. The decision to prioritize this request for ESSER funds will impact students, teachers, principals, district leaders, business administrators, and USBE. Prioritizing this request would show the legislature that we are putting our own skin in the game, which should send them a message that USIMS completion is a high priority for USBE and Utah's public education. The system is a key component to facilitate the reduction of reporting to our LEAs and to improve efficiency within public education. At no time in the history of public education in Utah has there been such a significant and important for a need for infrastructure that once and for all establishes and maintains the ability for our data to interoperate in the interest of our educators and students. USIMS provides that infrastructure. And I know that Director Young and Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones are on, and they are available to answer questions as well.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing board member question. Oh, board member Earl.
Is this going to, will we be hiring personnel for this? Is this part of, is this a personnel ask as well as coding and building out?
Chair, this is Scott. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, Deputy Superintendent Jones, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. Yes, the answer is yes. Currently, we're hiring contracted personnel programmers, though, because once we build USIMS, then we will revert back to current budget levels for our IT department and, you know, the full-time staffing there. So the answer is yes. But I do want to add that the intent is to hire vendor support or contracted personnel with those dollars, ma'am.
Okay, is this already, we already have a full understanding where we need to go with it, or we constructing this when we hire the contractor? Does that make sense? We're sailing where we need to go. Well, anyways, maybe I'm talking myself into a corner, but does that make any sense? Like we know what needs to happen in chunks, and this is just facilitating it happening quicker. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Please.
To board member Earl's questions, yes, we know where we're going. What we do, though, is we do make it an inclusive process of the LEAs. For example, the financial component of USIMS, we have a focused working group that consists of BAs. So there may be developments by way of the process that occur where we would, you know, say, oh, okay, yeah, we need to add that, or make sure that it has that interoperable capability. So we have a basic design structure in mind. So yes, we know which way we're going, but I do want to add that we'd also make sure that we facilitate the ability for LEAs to provide input of things we may not have thought of, you know, in the initial design concept. So.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. That's as much time as we have on this one, but well, let's take one more. Board Member Booth.
I'm just wondering if the amount that Board Member Norton mentioned, the 17.2 million, if that is an adequate amount to move forward this project in the way that we're wanting to in this with this particular resource that's available.
Chair Scott, if I may.
Yes, please.
The answer is yes. If anything, it'll help accelerate it faster because, you know, with this funding, we do it. Although I do have to make sure, as Board Member Norton brought up, we're under a lot of market pressure now to recruit and retain IT, you know, quality program, as are all throughout the industry. It's just what it is right now. So we feel strongly that we'd be able to potentially offer more money to programs. I say potentially offer more money. I mean, we'd look at that closely. That might allow for not only recruiting them, but retaining them longer to get to what right is. So my answer is yes.
Thank you.
Seeing no more hands at this time, I'll ask a quick one. Does this double what the legislative allocation was? Did I remember that right, or am I remembering wrong?
So if I may, Scott?
Yes.
Okay. Technically, yes. So the 17.2 million that was appropriated to us for USIMS and state money, we haven't started using that. I mean, I think there might be a little portion of it, like in the tens of thousands of dollars that we've, because we, you know, it is what it is. We haven't been able to retain and recruit. So technically, yes, it does double that. And it would stay in the IT budget until such a time as you, the board, decided if you know, you want us to use a thing. I would recommend that we keep it there, to my earlier answer to Board Member Booth, right? So yes, technically it doubles that, but then it also allows too for that money to be used by the board should we need to, you know, somewhere else, like, you know, back into the MSP. But then that would require, you know, legislative process to move it. So that's why we're asking you to do this now, so that we can make those decisions down the road as well, ma'am. So.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. Director Young, would this come from flexible or the other, or both?
Thank you. So it would all need to come from flexible.
The 8 million pot?
So the 8 million as well as the remaining ESSER 2. So if we combine those two, we would have $15,685,222 that's available and flexible towards this request.
So not quite double. Sorry, my fault, ma'am.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so really quickly on the 15 million total, is that even the others above that have been presented could come out of a 15 million total, not a 8 million total, theoretically?
So correct. So basically the difference between the 7.4 and the 8.2 is a question of timing.
Got it. Thank you. Let's go to a 3-minute presentation by Board Member Earl.
Thank you. Sarah, can you just put the image up? So this is this request is for Braille embossers. And I've worked just a little bit with Armando Venegas from USIMS. And he spoke to us last month, if you remember, about that increased need that they have. And what's happened is that teachers usually ask for their resources in the spring. This is just one example, but they asked for their resources in the spring, and what's happening is because the demand of immediate needs that they've had. Let me look at his stats. So about a 300% increase in teacher-generated classroom worksheets, and they do have some of these machines already throughout the state. So what the ask is, and I don't have an exact, we have an approximate of about between 3 to 3.5 million. It's the approximate, and that's a high estimate just because they are meeting during this month to talk about some details in association with this. And I can get some exact numbers at that point. But this would put more of these type of embosser printers directly into schools where we have students with specific needs, and teachers can immediately get the resources they need. There are 2 different types of embossers, and the one actually does the embossing and then it has a print it puts underneath. But when we checked into the cost of those were almost triple the amount of the cost. And Armando, he indicated that just a regular good quality embosser was enough, and that the teacher could actually print out for additional use in print what was being said, so that additional personnel could help, like the paraprofessionals or others could help and know that what the student was reading in the Braille could also be, they could follow along that type of a thing and help. So the request is we're doing a rough estimate of 500 embossers. Like I said, this is, we're going to get some more detail on this. That number could go down, it could go up just a little bit. And I will have more details next month, because they are actually, like I said, they're meeting and they're gathering up information on this particular product. So this is just once again, this is just an example of what it might look like. They're easily accessible within schools, and that's what makes it nice. Would need to make sure that there was, it had two key things. It'd have to have some kind of a maintenance agreement with it, as well as some kind of a training associated with the embossers, so that they would have immediate access to the teacher, whoever the leader was contributing to this, would be able to get the services they needed. And then there may be some other services associated with this, but that's what the ask is for this. And it would come out of the accelerated funding, primarily because this would assist with some of the direct impact of COVID, but it would help with accelerated learning with the students in this particular area. It would also ease some of the workload for, let me make sure I get the name right. Our TVI is what he kept saying. That's teachers of visually impaired students, that sometimes if there's not the ability to resources immediately, they end up working on those resources at night. And so this would help to relieve some of that workload. And with that, I will take questions. I can answer them, or I will take the questions down and I can get those answered.
Thank you. We've got 3 minutes for questions for Board Member Earl. Superintendent Dixon.
I will engage in wait time if board members have questions.
There aren't any.
I may have missed this, so I apologize. Board Member Earl, did you outline how this is related to pandemic, since that's what we have to report on with our SEA funds? How is this related to the ESSER funds?
Yes, it's directly related because of the increase of, just due to COVID, they've had an increase in the number of things that they've been asked to actually print at the USIMS, to the point where they can't get the resources always to the students when they need them. And they've had an increase, not just in, they used to just print off textbooks in the spring. People could put in their orders and then they could access that information immediately. But what's happened is because of, well, a variety of circumstances, including students that are at home or whatever may happen, could be COVID related as far as just quarantining or whatever, they can immediately print off materials. There's a lot more teacher generated materials that these particular students are in need of. And they've had, like I said, they've had about a 300% increase in the request for this. So, and there's often the turnaround for that is, if there's a large ask, the turnaround takes some time. And that's the request here, is that if they can get some of these embossers into districts, that the teachers that are in those districts can do an immediate turnaround of printed material that they've generated. So did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Not seeing any other questions at this time. Again, we can circle back at the end to any of these if we need to. Let's go on to Board Member Klein, Civic Education Proposal 2021. You have 3 minutes, Board Member Klein.
Okay, I don't know if you want to put it up or not. I included the chart. It wasn't there initially, but this proposal is for strengthening civics education through accelerated learning of foundational constitutional principles through music performance for 5th graders and essay, speech, art, and digital competition for teachers and students of all ages. This is currently being done in over 100 schools through the Hope of America program that is sponsored by America's Freedom Festival and was approved by former Governor Herbert to be used throughout the state, and has been wildly successful and loved by families in those areas where it's been available. Currently, they do a program every year at the Marriott Center for 8,000 fifth graders. This would allow
Board Member Klein, I think you might be muted. You might have accidentally muted.
Sorry, I'm hovering over it. So
I'm gonna give you some time back.
okay, where did I cut off?
You cut off in saying that this is currently going on with a lot of schools with the Americon. Maybe you could start there.
Okay, so currently it's being used in over 100 schools that gather, those fifth graders gather together every year at the Marriott Center. And they've got 8,000 fifth graders that are currently participating, and this funding would allow that to expand to 50,000 fifth graders throughout the state by making this venue or starting this in other venues, including St. George, Cedar City, Salt Lake, Ogden, and Logan. So allowing some of the more rural students to participate. It would help cover busing to go to that event so they learn the songs and that focus on the principles of the Constitution, specifically the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, all things that are required in our state code that be promoted in the schools, and does it in such a way using music that these kids learn these principles quickly. And they remember them. They have kids that participated in it 25 years ago when it first started that still remember the words of the music today, and have had their kids also involved. So this allows for greater equity in bringing this to other schools throughout the state. Even in rural areas, it can be done within schools. If they are not close to one of these larger venues, they can have several schools come together. It provides a t-shirt for the students so that they feel like they're involved in something much bigger than themselves and develops that love of America. It also allows for all students.
Oh, we lost you again. Or is that just me? Can you all hear Board Member Klein?
No, I wonder if she lost service. I can't hear her either, but she doesn't look muted.
She doesn't look muted. Board Member Klein, do you want to?
Okay, you just came back. Sorry, it cut out. I don't know what happened, but you're back. So.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay.
You could just finish up. That'd be super.
Sure. So it allows for kids of all ages to enter these contests and gives incentives for doing so as far as prize money, and it gives kids an opportunity to participate at national levels in these contests, as well as allowing everyone to participate because it's all submitted online. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Board Member Lear, we've got 3 minutes for questions.
I wondered if you've done any calculations. This sounds marvelous in some ways, but have you done any calculations about how much time this would take students out of classrooms, understanding it's a different learning model, but travel time, is there any estimate about, is this a 2-week period or a period?
Sure. So currently they've been doing it. It's been a 3-night event at the Marriott Center where family and friends can join them with the singing in the program. And there's a video at the beginning of the longer proposal that you can watch and see what it actually looks like. But that event cost, that 3-day event cost $135,757.
But then can I just stop you in the interest of time and say, the money's not interesting as much as and I get that it's a 3-night event. How much practice time? Is this a 6-month build up? Is this a 2-week build up? How much?
I can find that out for you, but it's all pre-recorded, the music. So it's a quick turnkey program that is easy to implement and teach. And because it's to music, the kids learn it quickly. So it doesn't take a ton of time.
I'm sorry, but still not getting at the question of ton of time. I mean, what is the practice time? If
I can answer.
If this happens at the Marriott,
You know, Cindy?
No, maybe Cindy can try. If it happens at the Marriott Center, somehow students have got to go there. They've got to practice. They've got to prepare all of this.
So they embed the practice time into the history class time in the 5th grade because these standards are covered in 5th grade core. So it's really embedded in the day. It's not like they have to miss 5 hours of language arts to get 5 extra hours of history. It's kind of embedded throughout. And also, they don't necessarily have to go to the Marriott Center. Some schools do it just their 5th grade at their own school. They wear the t-shirt and do it right at their own school. But it is cool. The ones who do go to the Marriott Center, they make a huge flag. And I mean, it's really awesome. But let's see. I don't want to ask a question if I've got other board members that have a question.
Thank you. That's good for me. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Klein, I have a question.
Sure.
I had the Director of Hope of America actually call me just recently, ironic timing, and say that some schools don't attend because they don't have enough money or resources and they don't want to ask the parents and whatnot. Would there be an opportunity to incorporate into this proposal not only for students in, I have to stop, my timer just dinged on myself, not only in rural areas, but for those students in maybe even more suburban areas that are in schools that haven't historically participated because of funds?
Well, that's why we're asking for the $750,000 to make it available to anybody that wants to participate as far as being able to attend.
Okay, not just the geographically ones away from the Marriott Center.
Right, well, that's why we would pick many more venues throughout the state, including Cedar City, St. George, Logan, what were the others? Salt Lake, Ogden. So that we would choose another venue like the Marriott Center, but in those areas.
So even if someone lived in Payson and wanted to go to the Marriott Center, this could help that school.
Yeah.
Too.
Absolutely.
That's my question. Thank you. Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Board Member Klein. The music of this program is great. There's no question about it. But I do remember serving on the governor's Civic Ed Commission, and this project used to be funded, as you stated, by that commission. And then we stopped funding it primarily because we couldn't get answers about how the money was being spent. And it was, to your point, it was limited to primarily Utah County districts, and Alpine was a big supporter, and I think Provo district. So this would certainly expand it. Does the money go to the venue primarily? I know you mentioned t-shirts and prizes, and then going back to the question about just getting specific how this relates to the pandemic, because then we have to do the reporting. So how is the money used and how does it relate to the pandemic? Those are things we'll be called on to answer. Thank you.
Okay, so that's in the chart as far as the allowable use cases. Number 1 says that it addresses the learning loss through implementation of evidence-based interventions. I've got the evidence-based there. Music helps to accelerate that learning so we can help get kids caught up on some of the things that they've maybe fallen behind on in a quick and fun and engaging way, like is required in ESSA. And yeah, and as far as the social emotional learning, that's a big piece of it also, to help improve kids' behavioral issues that they've experienced because of COVID through music.
And then can you speak to the funding? I did see your use case, so that's helpful. Thank you. And then can you speak to the funding?
Yeah, so we would have to, we'd probably have to get more details on how that is, but the busing, the venues, the t-shirts, the supplemental materials to make the program available to all of the schools or teachers that want to be a part of it. The contest whoever wins the contest, the little bit of money that goes to either the student or to the school as a whole, to then continue to incorporate more civics learning. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. If I would change anything, it would be to take the competition out of it and put more money into expanding the amount of participants. So,
and I'm sure that there would be some flexibility to discuss making those alterations if you want.
Thanks so much, Board Member Klein.
Last question, Board Member Lear, and then we can circle back if we need to.
No more. I just didn't take it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Then can we do a quick touch back to Director Young about, let's see, I think Board Member Klein said this would go in the learning loss kind of 30 million pot. Director Young.
So for that case, we're just going to need, we would just need some additional data sets. And then as a friendly reminder, all of that goes to the Department of Education to make final approvals. So we would want to make sure we had that robust justification so that's part of their consideration in making outcome determinations. If it was decided that we didn't want to go through that process for this or any of the other proposals, then it would be more appropriate in the reserve. Like the flex reserve, sorry.
Okay, so I don't have a say really, but maybe you all can work that out prior to us coming back so we know this has a good chance or it doesn't based on the questions.
And how soon do you need that information?
So we wouldn't submit anything to the Department of Ed for final approval until we have the board's final authorization related to the full suite of funding, most likely in December. With that said, Board Member Klein, we're happy to submit the information you've given us to our program officer at the Department of Education to see if they have any feedback in kind of an informal setting between now and the December board meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, last quick question, Board Member Earl.
Sorry, that I think Sarah just answered that. The idea that, something can be resubmitted if any of the are declined, right? That's the purpose of doing it early, is if you need to make any adjustments. So it allows for that to take place, right? Okay.
Good questions, thank you. Let's go to Board Member Moss for a 3-minute presentation on Refugee Education Pilot Proposal. You're muted, Board Member Moss.
Sorry, I thought Member Klein had 2 in there. Did we skip one, or was that just one that covered both?
One was the chart and one was the proposal.
Okay, gotcha. Well, thank you, Vice Chair. I'll try to be quick. This is something I'm really interested in. I'll try to give a little bit of background, some research and data, and then the outline of the program. But refugees, I think most people know, are individuals who have fled persecution in their home country due to race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular group. And I think they fall directly within what Superintendent Nielsen talked about this morning, those that are most vulnerable and have the biggest challenge. So I'll address that, but just to personalize it, I've gotten involved a little bit in the refugee community through the legal work, a few pro bono cases here and there. This week, I had the chance to do an asylum interview with a gentleman who was a helicopter pilot with the Afghan Air Force, had to flee the country because the Taliban were after him because he'd been after them, left behind a family, including 5 kids, 2 daughters that are in grades 7 and 11, who he hopes to bring here. And if we can get him asylum, then that's the next step, is to try to get his family. Those 2 daughters, the Taliban caps girls' education at grade 6, so they are trying to take English lessons, but they can't go to school. Hopefully one day they'll end up in our system. So that's who this is about. It's a program and I'm joined by Stephanie Patton, who's our Adult Education State Director. We've been working with Asha Parekh, who's the Director of Utah Refugee Services Office, and Christelle Estrada in our office, who is our Education Specialist for Title III Refugee and Immigrant Programs. So it came from a bill that was actually attempted a couple of years back. Carol Spackman Moss and Kathleen Reby, formerly of this board, ran a bill that was going to go through DWS. It didn't pass. And somebody brought it to my attention. I think it was Asha, and it seemed like a perfect case for ESSER money because it's geared toward these kids who are having the most difficult time, I think, in losing out during COVID. So this time we've worked it through the adult ed program, and it would be housed in our office rather than DWS, but in coordination with DWS. So couple points of the challenge. They arrive here often too late to graduate from high school. They age out at age 19, and that's who this is especially targeted towards. Many of them don't have education before they come here. Some come from Afghanistan, others comes from camps in Kenya after being born in Somalia, the Congo. They're all over the place. They arrive with limited English. Many who arrive here late either drop out or have to age out without graduating. So a little bit of research. First of all, the data I think was already shared a little bit. Graduation rates are lower for English learners, 73.5% compared to 90%. Proficiency scores, if you are English learner and economically disadvantaged, are down in the teens, and they've dropped as much as 5-6% during COVID. The adult program, our adult education program, potentially serves these kids and has good programs, but they don't go. They either drop out of school during high school, or they drop out and don't engage in adult ed when they leave the program without graduating. So the primary target here is kids who either drop out or age out, and they're getting lost. They're not going to adult education. This will provide them services where they're familiar, and I'll come back to that. But one point of the research in Europe, Germany especially, they've been challenged by a number of refugee issues, and they've addressed that partly through what they call a transition services or recipient services where the refugees are otherwise being served. So they usually go to a resettlement agency. They'll receive housing and job service, and usually a family friend perhaps. It's something we've done through our family. And so these are places they're familiar with, they're comfortable with. In Germany, they sometimes provide an extra 6 months worth. Oh, sorry. Is that my 3 minutes? Am I up, Cindy?
Yes, why don't you quickly summarize it up?
All right, 3 minutes goes fast. So we will have part-time teachers being paid to come to the refugee center or one of the schools where they are familiar with refugee services. They'll get workforce training, supplementation services from DWS. They'll have ELS services and mental health services provided. And so it's kind of a holistic approach to these specialized kids with the opportunity to expand to other immigrant populations. So the proposed budget is a full-time admin of 150, career navigator to help them look at careers for 100, part-time teachers serving at the refugee center for 50, mental health specialist part-time at 75, dual immersion tutors at 50, miscellaneous supplies and curriculum 25, for a total annual budget of 450. And we are looking for 2 years to fund this, after which we will assess. We'll start by looking for the initial cohort of students. Partly this will identify who's out there. So it will actually give us some new data. And then after the program's run as a pilot, we'll look at how some of these principles that they've learned can be expanded to the larger refugee community or to the larger immigrant community. So thank you for the extra time. I apologize.
That's
talking as fast as I could, and it still wasn't fast enough.
no apology necessary. Remember Earl.
Any patents here for any questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I know Cache County also has a number of refugees there. So this would be statewide, the accessibility of this. Okay.
Right.
I want to make sure. Thank you.
And I don't see any hands right now, so I'll go ahead and ask, was that, this might be in the case and I'm just didn't remember reading it, 450 per year, both years for a total of 9?
Correct.
9, okay. And that was, maybe this is back to Director Young, you said that would qualify under the accelerated learning loss. And can we use it for adult learning, or does it not have to be in the K-12 space?
So thank you for both of those. We would recommend this for a submission to the Department of Ed under the ARP disrupted learning. That is necessary just based on the time frame of wanting to do this program through 2024. In addition to that, the Department of Education has released guidance that does allow for programs that serve our adult education learners through what would normally be engaged in adult learning as eligible for the ESSER funding. And that's documented in the FAQ.
Super, thank you. Thank you, Board Member.
Response?
Director Young, yes.
If I could just add, some of these services would be supplemental services provided in their K-12 schools, and then the bulk of the catch-up credit provision would be at the refugee center or other schools. So it would be integrated starting sophomore year on site, and then if they do drop out, then they catch them through this program.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. Well, I just want to thank all of you for all of your presentations. You've been fabulous. We just have we have 15 minutes left. I'm going to divide it half into board members, either just throwing out additional ideas that they may have that they may be sending forward electronically in the next couple of weeks, or questions they have back to one of these presenters that we've already heard from today. And then the last 7 minutes will have our wonderful staff. I'm going to turn it back to Tiffany for a wrap up and next steps. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. I was going to ask a question of Jenny about her project.
Please.
Is that appropriate? So
yes.
Jenny, I'm fascinated with the ideal of the Braille producer. Did you get any input from USDB or Susan Patton about this? Can you just give us info on their thoughts?
Sure. Well, I didn't ask those specific individuals, but USIMS, sorry. Armando, if you remember, he presented last month on this very issue that they were dealing with, and this idea that a lot more teacher-generated resources, they were asking to do this. And so, yes, I got those that are associated with this printing of the Braille materials had direct impact and feedback on it. And as I indicated they're meeting on the 19th, so I'll be able to get some greater detail on the actual, the needs and the specific type of printers and that kind of a thing. But they're gathering in some information currently, and that information will be available then. So yes, I didn't ask the specific individuals you asked, but those that deal with this type of printing and the need, the increased need of teacher generated and the quick turnaround for those resources. Yes, there is a need there. Did I answer that question?
Yes, thank you. I remember the presentation where they told us it was between $30,000 and $40,000 to produce a textbook. And that just reverberates in my mind about how prohibitive that must be. And if there's a quicker, easier way to get things for the kids, I think that's—
Well, a lot of these, they'll still have the textbooks available, but this is immediate generation of materials, accessibility of those. And that's the difference. So that, if that makes sense, a child that is sick calls one day, oh, look, Michelle Tanner's even here. A child that's sick one day, or, something's happened, or they have to be quarantined, so they need to send something home with them. So this kind of thing. And I'll let Michelle Tanner speak to it if she wants to. So
go ahead, Michelle, for a quick response.
Thank you. I just wanted to say we are very supportive of this. It is very important. Our students don't have accessibility in the classroom when the teacher all of a sudden says, I want to print this worksheet, and everybody else has got it going on, and our student doesn't get to it. So although it's on the blind side, I have talked with Susan with this, and we're very supportive.
I thought you probably were. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for hands for other board member questions or comments at this time. So you don't necessarily have to bring an idea up right now. If you don't want to, you can think on all the things you thought and heard today. And then if you get an idea over the next week or two, you can submit that electronically. And I think in the wrap up, Chief of Staff Stanley will let us know again what the time frame is and what the deadline would be to do that. I just want all of you to know that I have loved listening today. I have no idea how we're going to make decisions on all of this, because all of these things are important. And I hope you feel as you've I wanted to excuse Mark Huntsman. He is in a school governance meeting with some legislators. We're all kind of double scheduled out today, but he and Laura and I want you to know that we're trying really hard this year in these study sessions to have at least half of the time in every study session for board members to engage in the dialogue, to learn from staff, and then to have at least half of the time to engage in the dialogue, which is coming from direct feedback from our board members from past years. And we want to be responsive to you. So if you have ideas or ways of things that we can continue to improve or change, please let us know. We will go ahead for these last 10 minutes and we'll turn it over to Chief of Staff Stanley for next steps and wrapping up.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis. So just in the hope of getting as much clarity and having as much transparency leading into the December board meeting where all of these decisions, the goal is to make these decisions. I thought it might be helpful to just display a spreadsheet that kind of shows some of the moving pieces here, right? Because we've got these 3 different funding sources and we've talked about several ideas. So I wanted to give you a sense of where we might be and what funding would still be on the table that we would still need direction on how to allocate, and getting a sense from the group around how we might go about developing proposals for the additional dollars that would be remaining on the table. Would that be okay, Vice Chair Davis?
Yes, it would. But a quick question, is that a 7 million ask under USIMS? I thought I had heard 17 million.
Yeah, so we split it. So hold on.
Oh, I
I'm gonna
see.
need Sarah to.
Okay, you just keep going on. I see.
Yeah, so the Sr2 flexible state reserve, okay, this is what's going on. All right, so given that USIMS would take more than the flexible reserve as is, there is an option on the table that we wanted to put forth, which is that we could essentially reallocate or allocate under the ARP-ESSER set aside the requests that would meet that criteria, right? So you have already allocated for the letters professional development, as well as another early learning for rural literacy coaches. You've already allocated those under the Sr2 flexible state reserve, but they would meet the criteria for the ARP-ESSER accelerated learning set aside. So you could shift those and that would free up a lot of flexible dollars. So that enables USIMS, as well as board member Hart's request, which need to be in the general set aside. So that's kind of what you're seeing here is a potential scenario if the board were to prioritize both of those requests. And then moving into the accelerated learning space. So it reflects kind of that letters shift, as well as all the others that have been discussed as potentially being eligible under that set aside. And then you can see that there's still 11.1 million remaining under that accelerated learning set aside. So we will be needing direction on how to develop proposals, or whether there are existing, for example, there are a couple of legislative appropriations requests that were one time that may meet this criteria. So the special education teacher shortage pilot could, right? But that's only 2 million. So there's still remaining there. So I don't know if, and again, this is study session, but we'll be looking for guidance on, how to, whether you'd like staff to develop proposals, whether you want us to go out and consult with community groups to develop proposals for the remaining. And again, it's a little tricky because this assumes that we're funding all these requests, which I'm not assuming on your behalf, but just wanting to model potential outcomes.
Would be so awesome to fund them all. And I could think of something to fill that 11 million right now, as I'm sure could every board member and every staff member too. Do you have time for a couple of questions from board members, or did you plan a tight 10-minute presentation?
Oh, no, that's it.
Perfect.
Yep.
Board member Earl, did you have a question?
Sorry, I neglected to take it down. But originally I was trying to figure out where the 11.9 went or came from, but sorry, as you scan down it was clear to me. So thank you. And we can easily move those around? Is that, I guess that's my question.
We take a motion, right? We would have to vote to do that in the next meeting. Chief of Staff.
Okay.
I see a nod.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Board Member Booth.
So as I'm listening to these figures, and I know that each of the board members have, done a lot of work and working with staff to come up with these figures, I'm a little bit suspect that perhaps everything that you want to accomplish, as you've explained, all the great things that can come from these proposals, that we're a little bit shy on funding. And I'm just wondering if we could just encourage everybody to drill down a little bit deeper, ask a few more questions, and make sure, because it would be unfortunate to say we're going to do this with this much money, and then just as one example, I happen to have been involved in many events in the Marriott Center over the last 46 years. And I know how much it costs for the Marriott Center. And I would assume that in Salt Lake or in Ogden or in Logan or wherever, that there are going to be similar costs. And if anything, they're getting higher as the years and months go by. So there are certain things that we might want to rethink and make sure that if we're going to put our money, our eggs in this basket, that we are putting in sufficient eggs to really do what we're proposing to do, first of all. And then secondly, I would just challenge all of us, since we have so many concerns, so many of us have concerns for special education. I would really encourage all of us who have interest and deep concerns and connections for that field to figure out which of the lists go on forever of what we could do for special ed. The needs are huge. So what are the things that we could do immediately to facilitate that particular student population to recover from the pandemic and to begin, educators that are stretched to the limits in every way. I think we need to be creative. Someone needs to be creative in coming up with some solutions, because here are resources that there are no questions, every bit of the 11 million that's left there, and 2 or 3 times that amount could easily just be sucked right up and do a lot of good for that population. So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, so agree a million times. Board Member Hutchings.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate that, Member Booth. And it also, looking at this list and hearing some of the presentations, I think I'm feeling amiss in missing some other populations. Specifically, I was thinking about our ELL population that already struggles and has been dramatically affected by the pandemic and their ability to access education. And maybe we need to take a second look, or I'm willing to take a second look and see if there's something we can do to support at least that specific population, or any other populations that have been more dramatically affected by the pandemic. So.
That would be great. And I'm willing to take a look at special ed as well. I was at a PTA meeting the other day, and the parents said, "What are you doing about special ed funding?" And I said, we're working on it. So no other hands. And we are ending right at right at 3 o'clock. And I just want all of you to know that doesn't happen by accident. With all of these presenters, staff member presenters and board member presenters, Chief of Staff Stanley has spent hours and hours and hours trying to balance and prepare and get ready for this study session, and has had even private meetings with me and others trying to get the time down and get every presenter on board. And I want to thank all of you for I know it to Board Member Moss's point, it was a fast 3 minutes, but you all did it, and I'm grateful, and grateful to our staff as well. One last comment, Board Member Booth.
I just was also thinking, as I reflected back on the meeting, of the superb information that we received from Drs. King and Marion and our Assistant Superintendent Nielsen. And that was information that we've read, and we read, you know, a summary of before, but to hear that presented, I think that probably the time is now for us, in reaction to that very valuable data that's been shared with us. Now is the time for us to consider what of those key issues that they brought up should we be developing programs for that will shore up and speed up that recovery process based on the very important data that they have gathered for us. Now, having that material, I'm thinking of a lot of ideas that hadn't occurred to me until this meeting. So I think all of us could jump in and get wet all over in terms of finding solutions.
It's so true. Chief of Staff Stanley, you should be careful what you ask for when you say we have additional funds, but I just appreciate those comments, Board Member Booth, and all of you. Thanks for attending today. It's 3 o'clock. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Cindy.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. I was
Thanks,
listening to my
everyone.
car yesterday. Good meeting.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
I want Sid to give a report on Bora Bora.
No, I'm sorry.
It was truly the trip of a lifetime. I highly encourage it. It's the first time in my life I can remember just thinking about nothing but nature for days on end. It was just spectacular. I went swimming with sharks and rays and snorkeling, I should say, because I wanted to keep my eye on them.